The man in the tailored suit didn't look up from his tablet as he spoke.
Your profit margins are too low, and I see at least 3 immediate areas for cost cutting. He tapped his screen deliberately, his voice too calm, too controlled. He started with the first cut, employee compensation. I sat frozen, my breath caught in my chest, unable to speak. Brian Hayes, the new regional manager from Bright Paw Veterinary Partners, didn't even seem to notice the weight of the moment. He continued, his words cutting through me like ice. After reviewing the numbers, your career of 14 years at Oakwood Animal Clinic now holds exactly 60% of your current salary. Nothing personal.
Nothing personal. I felt a coldness inside me, the chills seeping deeper with each word. Dr. Langdon, just business. I was Jessica Langdon, 41, and for as long as I could remember, this clinic had been my second home. I'd watched it grow from a small, family-owned practice into a pillar of the Lexington community, and now this.
Aligning your compensation with industry standards.
Brian continued, his voice too steady, too practiced.
It's just business, Dr. Langdon.
I forced a breath, swallowed the panic rising in my throat. This wasn't just business. This was my life, my work. I dedicated everything to this clinic, every hour, every sacrifice. A small piece of my soul had been woven into this place.
I leaned forward, steadying myself against the desk. I understand this is a transition period, I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil brewing inside. When do these changes take effect? Next pay cycle, he answered without looking up from his screen. We'll need your decision by Friday.
Friday. I heard the word echo in my mind as if it were a countdown, a ticking clock that would decide the future of everything I'd worked for. Dr. Harrington, the man who had founded the clinic, had assured us that Bright Paw would honor the values we'd built here. But now, those values felt like they were slipping through my fingers, and I was powerless to stop it. When Dr. Harrington decided to retire and sell, I said softly, my thoughts racing, we were told nothing would change. Brian gave me that practiced smile again. And it hasn't, Dr. Langdon. But we need to align you with the future. My mind swirled as I forced myself to rise from the chair. I'll have my decision for you by Friday, I said, my voice colder than I intended. Brian didn't acknowledge me as I turned to leave. The moment my hand touched the door handle, he spoke, his voice cool. Oh, and Jessica, we're implementing a new scheduling system next week. The training manual is in your email. His eyes never left his tablet. I paused at the reception desk where Valerie was engrossed in her work, her fingers moving rapidly over the keyboard, her face a mask of concentration. But when she saw me, her eyes softened with something. Sympathy? Pity? You heard, didn't you? I asked quietly. She nodded, barely meeting my gaze. 30% cut, plus reduced hours. Her voice barely above a whisper. What are you going to do? I glanced around the clinic, my clinic, the one I'd helped build. I saw the families waiting with their pets, an elderly man holding the leash of a golden retriever, a woman gently cradling a cat carrier, a child clutching a rabbit, eyes wide with innocence. None of them knew what was coming. I don't know yet, I whispered, my resolve hardening as I looked at Valerie. But I know this, something's changing, and not for the better. A fierce determination began to grow inside me, slowly but steadily. This wasn't just about me, about my salary. It was about everything we'd built, everything that had come to define Oakwood Animal Clinic. I had spent years building relationships with these people, with these animals. I couldn't walk away now. Not without a fight. That night, I sat in my small office, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. The walls were adorned with pictures of animals I'd treated, thank you cards from families I'd helped through difficult times. These weren't just clients. They were the heart of everything I'd ever done. I picked up the phone. I dialed Thomas, our newest veterinarian. "You've worked with Bright Paw before, right?" I asked, the question hanging heavy between us. "Yeah," he answered, his voice grim. 3 years at a corporate practice in Nashville." I waited, sensing the weight of his words before he continued. "It always starts the same. Cost-cutting, then efficiency improvements. Then they start pressuring you to upsell services. Everything becomes about the numbers. How many patients you see per hour, how much revenue you generate, how many unnecessary services you recommend to hit your targets." I sighed, knowing the truth before he even spoke it. "That's why I left," he said quietly. "Got tired of recommending things that weren't necessary just to meet a quota." Later, I called Dr. Harrington. His voice was heavy with regret when he answered. "I had no idea, Jessica. I thought they understood the culture. I wouldn't have sold if I knew this was what they had planned." "You deserved your retirement," I assured him. "But now I need to make a decision." "What are you thinking?" he asked, his tone laced with concern. I hesitated. The answer was still forming, still brewing inside me. The idea had been simmering in the back of my mind for days, but the moment I spoke the words, it would become real. "I'm considering opening my own practice." The silence on the line stretched for what felt like eternity, each passing second pulling me deeper into the gravity of my decision. Finally, Dr. Harrington's voice broke the stillness. "You should," he said, his tone filled with certainty. "You've got the experience, the client relationships. Lexington could use a clinic that still puts care above corporate margins." I hung up the phone, the weight of his words settling heavily on my chest. I sat there, staring at the degrees and certifications on the wall, their significance suddenly dimmed by the cold reality of what was happening. The clinic I had nurtured for over a decade was slipping away, replaced by a corporate machine that cared only for numbers. My thoughts drifted to the conversations I'd had over the years, with clients who had praised us for being different, human. They weren't just patients to us, they were family. And now that connection was being replaced with an efficiency-driven system that knew no room for empathy. A knock at the door interrupted my spiraling thoughts. It was Maggie, our head technician, her face a mask of professional concern. "Sorry to bother you, Dr. Langdon," she said softly, "but Mrs. Peterson is here with Baxter. She specifically asked for you, even though she's technically scheduled with Dr. Morris today." I stood, my body moving on autopilot, the weight of the decision already settling in my chest. "Tell her I'll be right there." As I walked toward the exam room, I realized that my decision wasn't just about my salary anymore. It wasn't just about the betrayal I felt from Bright Paw. It was about something far deeper, preserving what mattered, what had always mattered. By Friday morning, I had a clarity that I hadn't felt in weeks. My evenings had been consumed with research, commercial real estate, equipment costs, small business loans. I'd called 3 former colleagues who had made the leap into opening their own practices. Every conversation had reinforced my resolve. This wasn't just a pipe dream. It was the only logical course left. At precisely 9 o'clock, I knocked on Brian's door, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. "Come in," he called distractedly, his voice muffled by the hum of a video conference. I stepped inside, and he motioned for me to wait. "I'll call you back," he said curtly into the screen before swiveling to face me. "Jessica, good. Have you made your decision?" His words were clipped, rehearsed. "I have," I replied, my voice steady. I handed him an envelope, the thick paper feeling heavier than it should. "This is my 2 weeks' notice." Brian blinked, his professional mask slipping for a moment, revealing a flicker of genuine surprise. "You're quitting? Over a standard market adjustment?" "No," I corrected him. "I'm pursuing a new opportunity." My gaze was unwavering. "I wanted to inform you properly, with time to arrange coverage for my patients." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with a detached curiosity. "You know, I expected this reaction from some of the support staff, but not from you. You're a senior veterinarian. This is how corporate acquisitions work. Everyone needs to adjust." "I understand business realities," I said, careful to keep my voice level. "And I've made a business decision of my own." He shrugged, already reaching for my resignation letter. "We'll have HR prepare your exit paperwork. I assume you'll be joining another practice?" "Something like that," I replied vaguely, the coldness of his indifference igniting a spark of anger in my chest. By lunchtime, the news of my resignation had spread like wildfire through the clinic. Valerie, Maggie, and Thomas all found moments to pull me aside, their voices filled with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Is it true?" Valerie whispered, her gaze flickering nervously around the room as we stood by the filing cabinets. "Yes," I confirmed, my voice a quiet but resolute declaration. "My last day is 2 weeks from today." "What will you do?" Valerie pressed, her tone filled with something close to hope. I hesitated for only a second, then trusted her with the truth. "I'm opening my own practice. I've been looking at a space over on Maple Avenue." Her eyes widened. "Really? That's amazing, Jessica," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "I can't believe it." Throughout the day, similar conversations followed. Thomas expressed immediate interest, his eyes gleaming with a new kind of purpose. "Keep me posted," he said, his words heavy with unspoken meaning. It wasn't just about joining a practice. It was about something bigger, something they all recognized but couldn't put into words. Later that evening, as I sat at my kitchen table, the faint glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the legal pad in front of me, the weight of it all started to settle in. My phone buzzed with a text from Maggie. "Whatever you're planning, count me in." I smiled, the warmth of her support filling the spaces left cold by my departure. But it wasn't until my third cup of tea that the gravity of the moment truly hit me. As I was leaving for the day, Mrs. Davidson stopped me in the parking lot. Her Maine Coon, Oliver, had been my patient for years. "I overheard one of the techs saying you're leaving," she said, her voice filled with genuine distress. "Is it true?" When I confirmed it, her next words hit me like a thunderclap. "Where are you going? Because Oliver and I will follow you there." Her simple declaration of loyalty rocked me to my core. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully appreciated before. I wasn't just a veterinarian to these people and their pets. I was their veterinarian. And that bond? It meant everything. Something Bright Paw had never understood, never valued. I sat back down at my kitchen table, staring at my notes, the plans slowly taking shape before me. This wasn't just about refusing an unfair pay cut anymore. This was about creating something better, something that would honor the trust these families had placed in me. The next 2 weeks stretched out before me, each moment a battle to keep my focus. I maintained professionalism, treating each animal with the same care I always had, but the tension was palpable, hanging over every interaction with the management. Brian had taken to hovering during my appointments, clipboard in hand, his eyes constantly assessing, always assessing, looking for opportunities to squeeze out more numbers. It was as though my every move was under a microscope, but I was done being part of that machine. It was time to build something of my own. Brian scheduled my exit interview for my final day, sending daily reminders about my continued obligation to the non-solicitation clause in my contract. The words non-solicitation lingered in the air like a thin veil of threat. But after consulting with a lawyer friend, I learned it was little more than a hollow warning in Kentucky, largely unenforceable. What Brian didn't know was that I had already signed a lease on a storefront, 7 minutes across town. The space had once been a pediatrician's office, which meant most of the necessary infrastructure was already in place. A quiet thrill coursed through me as I recalled the financing I'd secured, a small local bank where I'd been a loyal customer for over a decade. Equipment suppliers, who had grown to trust my work over the years, had agreed to favorable terms for the new practice. "We value relationships too," my medical supplier rep had said during a discreet lunch meeting, his voice a hushed tone of support. "And frankly, we've seen what happens to quality when Brightpaw takes over. We're happy to support independent practices." I smiled, savoring the irony. Quality. That was something Brightpaw had never understood, and I had no intention of becoming another cog in their corporate wheel. At the clinic, I maintained a practiced silence about my plans. But despite my best efforts, the whispers began. Clients would ask me pointed questions during their appointments, as if they knew there was something more beneath the surface. "So, where exactly will your new practice be located?" Mrs. Thompson asked, her voice carrying the slightest edge of curiosity as I examined her terrier's ear infection. "I haven't finalized anything yet," I replied, careful to keep my voice steady, my face neutral. My gaze flicked over to the computer screen, where the new microphone had been installed the previous week as part of Brightpaw's quality assurance program. She lowered her voice, leaning in. "Well, when you do, please let me know. Max won't see anyone else." It was the same story with every patient, every family. They were waiting for me. The truth, buried under layers of corporate bureaucracy, was that they were trusting me, not just as a veterinarian, but as a person who cared for them, who had built relationships that went beyond prescriptions and checkups. They wanted that connection to continue, and I would give it to them. On Wednesday of my final week, Brian called me into his office once more. His demeanor had shifted from the detached corporate confidence he'd previously worn like armor to something far less composed, barely concealed irritation. The game was changing. "Several clients have been asking about your future plans," he began, his voice laced with an unspoken accusation. "I need to remind you of your contractual obligations." "I'm aware of my obligations," I replied, my tone calm, measured. "And I've been clear with everyone that I don't have concrete plans to announce." Brian tapped his pen against the desk in a sharp rhythm, his eyes narrowing. "We've invested considerably in acquiring this practice, Dr. Langdon. Brightpaw won't look kindly on any attempts to undermine that investment." "I understand," I said, my gaze steady, betraying nothing. "Is there anything else?" He studied me for a long moment, his fingers stilling on the pen before he leaned back in his chair, a subtle shift in his posture. "We are prepared to reconsider your compensation package. Perhaps we were too aggressive with the initial adjustment." The offer caught me off guard. For a moment, I wondered if this was their way of admitting a mistake. A realization that maybe, just maybe, they had underestimated the value of the clinic's human element. But it was too late. The lease was signed, equipment ordered. Riverbank Animal Hospital was already taking shape in my mind, and nothing Brian or Brightpaw could offer would change that. "I appreciate that, Brian," I said, my voice firm. "But my decision is made." Later that afternoon, Valerie slipped a folded note onto my desk. The paper was creased at the corners, the words written in her familiar, looping handwriting. Inside was a list of 20 client names with a simple message. "These people called today, specifically asking about you." At the bottom, she had written, "When you're ready to hire a receptionist, call me first." A rush of warmth spread through me as I read the note. They were with me. This wasn't just about business. It was about loyalty, about the unspoken bond we shared with the people who had trusted us. I wasn't alone in this fight. I would build this practice with them, and I would build it better. That evening, I met with Thomas and Maggie at a small coffee shop, far enough from the clinic to avoid any prying eyes. We sat at a corner table, the low hum of conversation around us fading into the background, as I laid out my plans in detail. "I've secured a location on Riverbank Drive," I said, leaning in slightly, my voice low but certain. "It's going to be called Riverbank Animal Hospital. We're opening in about 6 weeks if everything goes according to schedule." 6 weeks? Maggie repeated, her expression thoughtful. Interesting timing. Thomas leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "What's your staffing plan?" "I need a veterinarian who shares my philosophy of care," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "And I need an experienced lead technician." Their smiles were all the confirmation I needed. By the time we left that coffee shop, my new practice had unofficially gained its first team members. The pieces were falling into place, and with each passing moment, I could feel the momentum building. But as I walked back to my car, I had no idea that Bright Paw was about to force my hand in a way I never anticipated. The second to last day at Oakwood began with a shock. Posted on the break room bulletin board was a new fee schedule, effective immediately. The price increases were staggering. Basic vaccinations that had once cost $45 were now $65. Dental cleanings, previously priced at $300, had jumped to $420. But it wasn't just the prices that made my blood run cold. It was the new bundled care packages, services that were rarely needed for healthy animals, tests that felt like an upsell, not a medical necessity. They had crossed a line. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," whispered Jenna, a young vet tech who had joined us just before the acquisition. Her voice was barely a murmur, but it was loaded with a quiet fury. "Dr. Morris already told me we need to recommend the premium package to every client." My stomach clenched, an icy wave of dread washing over me. This wasn't just corporate streamlining anymore. This was exploitation, a calculated squeeze of every dollar, no matter the cost to the client's dignity or their pet's health. My mind raced as I prepared for the day ahead, knowing I would be forced to walk a thin line between my professional integrity and the corporate demands suffocating the practice. When Mrs. Whitaker walked through the door with her elderly cat, Chairman Meow, for his arthritis checkup, I found myself trapped in an impossible position. The new protocols left no room for compromise. I was instructed to recommend a full senior panel costing nearly $500, despite having run the same tests just 2 months earlier. "Is this really necessary?" Mrs. Whitaker asked, her voice tight with concern, her hands trembling slightly as she held the cat carrier. She lived on a fixed income, budgeting carefully for Chairman's care. I felt a pang in my chest. This wasn't just a medical decision. This was a moral dilemma. "The new owners have implemented standard protocols," I said, keeping my voice calm, trying to reassure her. "But in my professional opinion, given Chairman's recent normal results, we could wait another 4 months for these particular tests." She looked at me, a flicker of relief passing through her eyes. I thought I had done the right thing, finding a way to ease her burden. But that moment of compromise was short-lived. The door swung open before I could complete the visit. Brian Hayes stepped into the room, his presence imposing. He was all polished professionalism, his smile practiced, his eyes cold. "Mrs. Whitaker, I'm Brian Hayes, Regional Manager." He introduced himself, offering a handshake that felt more like an order. "I couldn't help but notice that we haven't scheduled Chairman's senior wellness package today," he continued, his words smooth but laced with a pressure that made my skin crawl. What followed was nothing short of a masterclass in corporate manipulation. He subtly implied that skipping these tests was neglectful, that we could be missing out on something critical. Then, the ultimate tactic, a special one-time discount that still left the tests grossly overpriced. I watched Mrs. Whitaker's face shift, her confusion giving way to guilt, then resignation. She finally agreed, her hands gripping her purse a little tighter, the weight of the decision visibly settling on her shoulders as she walked out of the room. The moment she left, Brian turned to me. His voice was cold, the smile gone. "Dr. Langdon," he began, his tone carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "When we recommend a protocol, we expect our veterinarians to support it fully." I clenched my jaw, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Those tests are unnecessary right now. This is about standardized care," he countered, his gaze sharp. "Your personal attachment to clients is clouding your professional judgment." I nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. My personal attachment to clients is called building trust. It's why this practice has thrived for decades. Brian checked his watch dismissively, his gaze already shifting away. "Well, thankfully, we only have to manage that approach for one more day." The rest of the day felt like I was moving in slow motion. Brian hovered over my appointments, stepping in whenever I didn't push the new protocols aggressively enough, his presence like a dark cloud, suffocating the air around me. By the time closing time came, I was emotionally drained, every interaction feeling like a battle I didn't want to fight anymore. As I was updating Chairman Meow's file, something caught my eye, something that made my blood run cold. In the notes section was an administrative entry that read, "Patient transfer to Dr. Morris, effective immediately. Dr. Langdon no longer primary veterinarian." I blinked, the shock of it sinking in. I checked a few more files, longtime patients, pets that had been with me for years. All of them had been reassigned. Before I left that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being cornered. I had planned to leave quietly, give myself time to set up my new practice, and then inform my clients of my new location. But Bright Paw's aggressive tactics and their willingness to exploit client trust changed everything. At 2:10 a.m., I made a decision. I sat at my computer, fingers trembling slightly as I drafted an email to the lawyer who had been helping me with the details of establishing my new practice. Need to accelerate timeline. How soon can we open, even in limited capacity? Her response came quickly. With temporary equipment, rental, and creative scheduling, potentially 2 weeks. Call me in the morning. I closed my laptop, the weight of the decision finally lifting enough for me to relax enough to sleep. Tomorrow would be my last day at Oakwood Animal Clinic, and it wasn't going to go the way Brian Hayes expected. My final day arrived with a strange mix of finality and anticipation. I had spent the early morning hours preparing, making calls, setting things in motion, and now, as I stood at the threshold of the life I had built for myself, I knew I had crossed a line. There would be no turning back. Today, I wasn't just leaving the clinic. I was taking back control. And Bright Paw, they hadn't seen the storm coming. As I parked in my usual spot for the last time, an unsettling calmness washed over me. The weight of the day didn't hit me immediately, but lingered at the edges of my thoughts. It felt as though time had slowed, the world outside moving while I remained frozen in place. The morning passed with a series of emotional goodbyes, each one laced with a sense of finality that made my chest tighten. But I held it together. Staff members who had become family over the years exchanged looks, their faces betraying a sadness that they didn't want to voice. Even the newer employees, those who barely knew me, seemed touched by the shift in the atmosphere. "The schedule looks light today," Valerie noted when I stopped by reception, her voice quieter than usual. Indeed, I had only 4 appointments on the calendar, strange for a Friday. I knew why. Brian had blocked off most of my day for transition activities. I explained away the light schedule. Apparently, I have a lot of paperwork to complete before I leave. What neither of us said was that my regular clients had already been reassigned to the other veterinarians, their faces fading into the shadows of a place I was no longer part of. At noon, Brian summoned me to the conference room for what he called a departure protocol meeting. I thought it would be the usual formalities, returning keys, signing final paperwork, maybe a token acknowledgement of my years of service. But when I walked in, I saw two unfamiliar faces seated at the table. One was introduced as Bright Paw's regional legal counsel, a stern woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that never left me. The other was their human resources director, whose tight smile did little to hide her unease. Brian spoke first, his voice cold and formal, as though trying to maintain control. "Before we process your departure, we need to address some concerns," he said. "It's come to our attention that you may be planning to open a competing practice in violation of your employment terms." My stomach dropped, but I held my ground. The game was changing, and they knew it. The legal counsel slid a document across the table to me. I could feel her eyes on me as I glanced down at the paper. It was a cease and desist letter. "This is a cease and desist letter," she said, her tone like an icy wind. "Regarding any plans to practice veterinary medicine within a 20-mile radius of this facility for the next year." I didn't touch the paper. I stared at it, my hands clenched at my sides. "I don't recall signing any non-compete agreement," I said, my voice calm, but every word was like a knife cutting through the tension. The legal counsel didn't flinch. "It's incorporated in the transition documents all employees signed when Bright Paw acquired the practice," she said smoothly. "Actually," I said, reaching into my bag and pulling out a file, "I have copies of everything I signed. There was no non-compete clause in any of those documents." I placed my file on the table, the weight of it a silent challenge. "My lawyer confirmed this yesterday." The atmosphere in the room shifted. The HR director and the lawyer exchanged a brief, telling glance, and Brian's confident facade faltered, if only for a moment. "We're not here to debate legalities," Brian said quickly, his voice rising with irritation. "We simply want to ensure a smooth transition for our clients." "Your clients," I corrected him gently, meeting his eyes without hesitation. "And I agree completely about ensuring their care isn't disrupted." The HR director, sensing an opportunity to de-escalate, softened her tone. "Dr. Langdon, I understand you've been with this practice for many years. Perhaps we can find a compromise that works for everyone." I smiled, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "I'm always open to reasonable solutions." What followed was 2 hours of tense negotiations, each word carefully chosen, each offer more desperate than the last. In the end, we reached a simple agreement. I would not actively solicit Oakwood's clients for a period of 30 days, and in exchange, Bright Paw would drop any claim to restrict my practice, location, or timing. By the time we finished, my tenure at Oakwood Animal Clinic was officially over. I collected my personal belongings, each item feeling like the final thread of a life I was leaving behind. I walked out of the clinic with a mixture of nostalgia and excitement swirling inside me. As I was pulling out of the parking lot, my phone chimed with a message from Valerie. "Just overheard Brian on the phone with corporate," he said. "She's just one veterinarian. How much impact could her leaving possibly have?" I smiled at her message, typing a quick reply. "I guess we'll find out." What Brian and Bright Paw didn't realize was that I wasn't just leaving. I was already 2 steps ahead. The wheels were in motion, and nothing would stop what was coming next. Riverbank Animal Hospital opened its doors exactly 17 days after my departure from Oakwood. The timeline had been ambitious, requiring round-the-clock work, temporary equipment rentals, and a skeleton crew working double shifts. But we made it happen. Thomas joined me as the second veterinarian, and Maggie came aboard as our lead technician, after her hours at Oakwood were reduced to part-time. Valerie gave her notice the day the new reception desk was installed, citing Bright Paw's hostile work environment in her resignation letter. Our first day was supposed to be a soft opening, a chance to test systems with a handful of appointments before the official launch. But the following week, I personally called 20 of my longtime clients whose pets had ongoing medical needs that I'd been managing. Each conversation felt like a quiet victory. Each voice on the other end filled me with the warmth of knowing that I wasn't alone in this. I was building something that mattered.
And as for Brightpaw, they were about to learn just how much impact one veterinarian could have. At 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before our official opening, I stood frozen at the front window, my breath catching in my chest. A line of people and their pets stretched across our small parking lot and spilled down the sidewalk. It was more than I could have ever expected, an overwhelming sea of faces, familiar and new, all gathered in anticipation.
"Did you call all these people?" Thomas asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. "No," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I only contacted a few with urgent needs." Valerie, already stationed at the reception desk, was logging into our new practice management system. She looked up, her lips curling into a knowing smile. "I think word got around," she said as we opened the doors. Familiar faces poured in, each one bringing with them a sense of relief, a sense of home. Peterson, with Baxter the beagle, her face lighting up when she saw me. The Garcias, with their 3 rescue cats, had clearly been waiting for this moment. Mr. Johnson and his ancient tortoise Methuselah, both old friends of the clinic. These were the clients who had trusted me for years, some for decades. "We saw on the community Facebook page that you were opening today," Mrs. Peterson explained as she entered, her voice warm with familiarity. "No one wanted to miss it." By lunchtime, we had already registered over 70 pets in our new system. By closing time, that number had more than doubled. The message was clear, echoing through every conversation. They followed their veterinarian, not the clinic brand. What touched me most, though, were the small gestures of support. Homemade cookies, congratulatory cards, and little gifts, tokens of appreciation for the new practice that was becoming a sanctuary in the community. One family even arrived with pizza for the staff's lunch, a simple act that spoke volumes about the bond we'd formed. As we finally closed the doors after what felt like the longest but most exhilarating day, my phone chimed with a message from a former colleague still working at Oakwood. The text was blunt, the words sharp with tension. "Emergency meeting called for tomorrow morning. Apparently, the schedule is suddenly empty." The following week exceeded even my most optimistic projections. We had to expand our hours almost immediately, hiring additional staff just to accommodate the influx of patients. By the end of our first month, we had registered over 800 pets in our system, about 70% of Oakwood's former client base. But it wasn't just the number of clients that surprised me. It was how they found us. We had done minimal advertising, only a simple announcement in the local paper and a reliance on word of mouth. Yet the clients kept coming, often mentioning that they had heard about us from friends, neighbors, or community social media groups. "The neighborhood pet groups have been buzzing about your new place," one client told me as I examined her Labrador puppy. "Everyone's talking about how you stood up to that corporate chain." I hadn't intended to become a symbol of resistance against corporate veterinary care. But somehow, the narrative had taken hold. People shared stories about their experiences with Brightpaw, their new pricing, their impersonal protocols, and they compared it to the transparent fees and individualized care we offered. I became more than just a veterinarian. I became the face of something bigger. 3 months after opening, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Harrington, my former mentor and the previous owner of Oakwood, came to tour the new practice.
"I had to see it for myself,"
he said, his voice tinged with admiration as he walked through the clinic, his gaze lingering on the details, the friendly staff, the happy clients, the warmth in the air.
"You've created something special here, Jessica."
As we walked through the halls, staff and clients greeted him warmly, many expressing how much they missed him, but how happy they were with the new practice. There was no bitterness in his words, only regret.
"I made a mistake selling to Brightpaw,"
he admitted quietly, almost to himself, as we finished the tour. I should have approached you first. I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Everything worked out as it should, I said, my voice steady, the weight of the moment settling over us both. Later that day, I received an email that brought everything full circle. It was from Brian Hayes, requesting a meeting to discuss the veterinary landscape in Lexington. The words stung with an edge of thinly veiled calculation. We'd like to talk about your competition. A meeting would be in order. I smiled as I typed my response, the words flowing with a calmness that had taken root deep inside me. I'm available next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Nothing personal, just business. Looking around at the thriving practice we'd built, filled with wagging tails, purring patients, and a team I could trust, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't success. It's creating the place you were always meant to be, the one that had been waiting for you all along.